Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. I'd like to call your attention to what I think is the most important session of our entire conference. My name is Kate McEvoy, and I'm privileged to serve as the Medicaid Director for the state of Connecticut. And I wanted to start by welcoming some honored guests that we have today. We'll be introducing them. To say, by way of context setting, there's been a lot of dialogue and discussion about Medicaid this year, but what we have observed is that often in that dialogue, the missing component is the voice of people served by Medicaid. People are the reason for being of the Medicaid program. And what you'll hear today is unique personal perspectives from people served by the program. 6 remarkable people who have been generous enough to agree to come and join us and share their stories and their passion for their various vocations and work, and also talk about how that intersects with their service in the Medicaid program. I will be introducing each of our panelists in just a moment, but I also wanted to say that when we began to think about planning for today, it was very important for us to give an opportunity for members across the country also to share their thoughts. I'm very grateful we approached my fellow Medicaid directors from the states and territories, and we were overwhelmed by an enormous response from members who care passionately about this program. We will be sharing today just a few excerpts of that wonderful response that we received, which we're going to be making available in other media, because I can't say enough, the very reason for being, the center point of our program is serving people. So please join us in watching a brief video that will highlight a small number of those perspectives we received, and then we'll have the privilege of hearing from the perspectives of those present with us on the panel. want to express our thanks and gratitude to everyone who agreed to be featured in the video, particularly Anna Corbin, who's joining us this afternoon. You're going to hear much more from her. And to say, some of the themes that we see emerge, just the diversity of people served by Medicaid and how it contributes to civic engagement and work. You're going to hear a lot about that today. And without further ado, I really want to segue to talking to those who have generously agreed to join us. I'd like to first introduce Rufus Watson. Rufus is a resident of the District of Columbia. He's an Emeritus Caritas DC member, AmeriHealth, who is also a primary caregiver for his mother. And Rufus has been here with us at the conference and participating actively. So Rufus, we want to ask you to start the panel off by talking about what does Medicaid mean to you personally?
Basically, it's an extension to what I have in place now, which is AmeriHealth Caritas DC. It's there when there is a lapse in coverage, which that only happened once. And basically they were there to cover for me because I'm a person who, because I am my mother's caretaker, I'm not able to work, so I have no income coming in. This way, I don't have to worry about paying for a hospital bill or a deductible of any kind, prescriptions of any kind, getting a referral when I don't need a referral. And that's what it means to me, and I was very happy for that and everything. Because like I said, without it, one of the incidents was when we made a transition from one type of hospitalization to the other, and a lot of times the hospitals and the programs did not accept my hospitalization. Medicaid kicked in, and that was the one thing. So I didn't have to worry about that and everything. So that's what it really means to me. And like I said, I was happy to know that I had it, because at first I did not know that I had it, because like I said, there were things that I had already in place. So when I found out I had it, and I said, okay, good. Like I said, it was an extension to what I do have, and that's what it means to me.
It's really great to hear about the peace of mind. And something that I know you shared with me also is it helps to support the goals you have for your own health. Would you like to comment a little on that?
He did put this.
It also helps to support your own goals for your health.
Oh, yes. Let's see. I am proud of this little book, and it says Passport to Health. And in here, it's not my signature, but every other signature, anybody that's a health professional. So when I see my doctor, no matter what the profession is, especially, they are the ones that write in this book. They're the ones who tells me what type of progress that I am doing, from my A1C to my weight, my pressure, and anything else that they can think of. Right now, the present moment, Medicaid is helpful in because they supply a organization that helps me to improve my health so I can take care of my mother and everything. And that is a good thing, because I enjoy the classes that I have, but one of my classes that I do enjoy, that's my healthy cooking class and everything. So yes, I can cook. I'm much better than any one of you in this room. Because I've already been told by one person that I need to be cooking for her. So, and I got to get up enough nerve to do that for her and everything. And it's not even my mother, so let's not go there one. Okay? But I am happy because, like I said, I made a tremendous amount of improvement behind Medicaid, because if you notice, I came in here with my walker. Normally I use my wheelchair, but in December of 2014, yours truly started to lose the ability to walk. The last time I stepped into my church was January the 2nd of 2015. And the next time I did step into my church was November the 15th of 2015. And Medicaid was there all the step of the way by providing services, to have another organization to provide me services to help improve my health. And that's a good thing. Right now, I started out at in January of 2015 at 350 pounds. This is November of 2017, and I am down to 276 pounds.
Congratulations.
One of the other things that I'm happy about that a lot of people have trouble with, and that's the A1C. Mine is 6.1, and I'm happy about that. So being a diabetic is not even the issue now, just maintaining and, like I said, and being careful and trying to stay on track. Thank you.
So I love hearing that. So peace of mind, and then it's also really supporting those really specific health goals that you have. And I think everyone in the room joins you in congratulating you on your weight loss.
Yes,
that's huge.
Trust me, like I told you and everybody, I'm honored and privileged pleasure to be here because I really wanted to talk because, like I said, I got teased earlier today. Who was it from? Yesterday. It was yesterday from Jerry and Kyle. They said, can they throw softball? I said, throw softball questions at me. I said, do I look like a person that you can throw softball questions at me? So then if you really want to ask me some questions, you better make sure that ball is coming at me at 100 miles an hour. Because trust me, I'm going to let you know where it's going after I hit it, okay?
That's good. No soft pitch. Well, great. Rufus, thank you very much. I would next like to turn to Anna. As I said, Anna was featured. We're so grateful that you were willing to be featured in the video. Anna, when I asked Anna how she'd like to be introduced, she is a resident of Pennsylvania, describes herself as a mom, a homeschooler, a student, and a licensed cosmetologist who enjoys doing anything that stimulates her creativity. Her connection to Medicaid is her two sons who have Noonan syndrome. They receive Medicaid benefits to cover what their primary insurance does not. So Anna, would you tell us more about your experience?
Sure. Good afternoon, and I just want to say quickly, thank you so much for allowing us to speak today. This is fabulous that we're getting to have our voices heard. In September of 2009, when my son Henry was 17 months old, he had a GI bleed caused by a Meckel's diverticulum rupture. He has a bleeding disorder known as von Willebrand disease, and because his blood does not clot properly, he faced a total medical crisis. A rare, usually insignificant problem led to complications that resulted in Henry almost bleeding to death. He was rushed to Johns Hopkins Hospital by ambulance, where he received a blood transfusion and spent 10 days in the ICU while the doctor saved his life. By the last day of Henry's stay, all the veins in his little arms, legs, feet, and hands had collapsed due to the constant monitoring of his blood factor counts. For his final blood draw before discharge, they had to take his blood from his scalp. I stood outside of the room because I couldn't bear to watch. I was exhausted, I was weak, and I was hungry. I had spent all 10 days and nights in the hospital with Henry, and I had been living off of snacks from the vending machine because our family budget at that time did not allow for us to eat at hospital food courts. So I spent most of my time at Henry's bedside that week with an empty stomach. One of my biggest regrets as a parent is that on that day, I didn't have the strength or energy to be with my son when he needed me the most. I am a stay-at-home mother of two who lives in Hanover, Pennsylvania, and I never thought we would ever need Medicaid. My husband and I began our married life in a comfortable position in the middle class. We had good jobs, and after our first son, Jackson, was born, I found a very happy balance between work and home. When Jackson was 2 years old, he began having some inexplicable health issues. I was missing so much work that my husband and I decided I should quit my job to give Jackson my full attention. Losing half of our income was difficult, but it was manageable as long as we adhered to a strict budget. In February of 2008, I gave birth to Henry 6 weeks early. His health issues began immediately. He spent over a week in the NICU and was diagnosed with a heart defect and failure to thrive at 2 months old. Thanks to Google and a very attentive pediatrician, we discovered the answer to both our son's medical issues in October of 2008. They have a mutation of the PTPN11 gene, also known as Noonan syndrome. When children are diagnosed with a genetic condition like Noonan syndrome, which affects various systems of the body, they are referred to a hospital that specializes in rare diseases for genetic counseling. We were sent out of state to Johns Hopkins Hospital, where they began testing the boys for every possible complexity related to NS. Our financial situation had already become more strained with Henry's NICU stay, cardiology visits, and genetic testing. The boy's diagnosis had cemented my decision to stay home, and so we were still only receiving one income. Once we began adding more diagnoses, specialists, procedures, surgeries, and prescriptions to their medical care, the financial strain became a lot to bear. We relied on credit cards for everything. It was not only the medical bills. It was the added costs of gas money to get to Baltimore multiple times a month. It was the cost of having to purchase meals when visits lasted through lunch and dinner. By 2010, our credit card debt totaled $42,000. I can't begin to tell you what it's like to see both of your children, both of your babies, go through so much, spending their toddler years in hospital beds, throwing up at their own birthday parties, missing trick-or-treat or Christmas parties due to illnesses. But to watch all of that while not being able to make up for all they were missing with other activities was heartbreaking. During the times they were healthy, we couldn't do anything with them or go anywhere because we couldn't afford to. In addition to spending our days and nights caring for the boys, distributing medicines, cleaning up vomit, monitoring fevers, keeping them from injury, I also had to deal with the burden of trying to find ways to pay for their care, while dealing with calls from bill collectors and utility companies about missed payments. We held multiple yard sales a year. I would sell the boys' clothing as soon as they outgrew it. If it was a few days before payday and we needed a copay, I would find a childhood keepsake and put it on eBay. Or I would choose a piece of furniture that I decided we didn't use that often, and I'd put it on Craigslist. We collected change, and we would cash it in for baby food, for gas, for milk, for prescriptions. It was an extremely stressful time. I heard about Pennsylvania's PH95 Medicaid program for children with disabilities through a fellow Noonan syndrome mom from Philadelphia on Facebook. I had always assumed that Medicaid was only income-based, and I did not think we would qualify. After I researched the program, it seemed to be the answer to our financial problems. It was not an easy decision, though. Johns Hopkins had literally saved my children's lives. Since Medicaid doesn't cross state lines, we would have to make this switch to Hershey Medical Center and say goodbye to the physicians we had come to trust. But at that point, we were on the verge of filing bankruptcy and losing our home. So we did it. We applied for Medicaid in June of 2012, and in no time at all, the boys were approved, and Medicaid began paying for all of the boys' deductibles and copays. Anything that my husband's employer insurance doesn't cover for the boys, Medicaid takes care of it. It is important to me that people understand the true benefits of Medicaid. It is not just about the health care. I will tell you that any good parent would sacrifice anything to provide for their children. That's why we were in debt. Our kids' health care was our priority, and so all the other bills to us were not essential. So now having Medicaid, we no longer feel irresponsible because now we pay our bills. We didn't lose our home. We didn't file bankruptcy. Slowly but surely, without the hundreds of dollars a month in medical bills, we have pulled ourselves out of the rubble. We're paying our debts. We don't get collection notices anymore. We stopped getting insufficient funds fees. We stopped being a burden on the utility companies and the credit card companies. In the 5 years since the boys were approved for Medicaid, we have not only been able to get on our feet financially, but we have been able to rejoin society. We still have to live on a budget. We still live on one income because the boys' immunity and stomach issues led to a decision to homeschool. And life as a parent of children with medical complexities will never be easy, and it will never be worry-free. But we are surviving. We no longer feel hopelessness. My husband and I went years without sleep, worried about our children, worried about money, worried about how we would pay for the next major health crisis. We now know what security feels like, and so we can focus all of our time and attention on keeping our children healthy. We have come a long way. Jackson is now a confident 12-year-old who, despite his health issues, gives speeches on Capitol Hill on behalf of children with complex medical needs. Henry is 9 and the most resilient child I know, who takes charge of his own health care by asking his physicians questions at every visit. Both of my boys are Wish Kids and have been granted wishes through Make-A-Wish. One thing that organization always stresses is how children's health often improves after a wish trip or event, because a happy and stress-free life is essential to keeping children with life-threatening conditions healthy. I can say that Medicaid has also done that for my boys. That's what Medicaid is for me. It's a lifeline. It's security. It's knowing that my children have the health care they need while also having food on the table and warm coats in the winter. Medicaid is keeping my sons healthy, happy, and thriving, and I am incredibly grateful for that.
And I just want to say on behalf of all of us, we can't imagine what it means to tell that story. It's so enormously powerful, and we're so grateful for you for doing that in front of so many people. And I think those themes around how it goes beyond just the coverage to give you the peace of mind and the economic security, you just illustrated so movingly and so practically with respect to your family, and we're really grateful that you would tell that powerful testimony, really. I'd now like to introduce someone who may have found some similar themes in Anna's remarks. Next is Stephanie Silverman, and Stephanie had actually the opportunity to have some calls with Anna in advance of the panel and share some experiences. Stephanie is a resident of Virginia. She's a mom to 5 wonderful sons, 2 of whom are served by a Medicaid home and community-based services waiver. She left her career to become a full-time caregiver and advocate for children with special health care needs to support 2 of her sons and other children and families who face similar challenges. So we're really eager to hear your perspective, Stephanie.
Well, for me and my family, Medicaid means life. Medicaid swept in during the biggest crisis in our lives and continues to provide life-sustaining supports. The first thing you notice about me is the one aspect of my life that has the least meaning. I started using a power chair about 6 years ago when I, too, was diagnosed with the same neuromuscular disease as my son Cody had been diagnosed with. I am not a Medicaid recipient, but Medicaid saved my life. In August of 2004, my 5th and youngest son at the age of 7 fell over a 2nd-story railing in our home and fell head first onto a hardwood floor. He sustained a severe traumatic brain injury. It was shocking and devastating to our entire family, who was already dealing with significant health care needs for his brother. Eventually, he did learn to walk and talk again in inpatient rehab, and then began the arduous process of outpatient therapy 3 times a week and adjusting to his new way of life. We had excellent insurance then. They paid for the hospital. They paid for the Life Flight helicopter to get him to the hospital. They even paid for inpatient rehab and paid for most of the outpatient therapies. As life tends to do, bad things seem to happen all at once. And less than 2 months later, Cody was at Cincinnati Children's for routine specialist follow-up. He became suddenly very ill and quickly ended up in the intensive care unit in critical condition. And remember, this is happening in 2004. This was before the Affordable Care Act. Cody had been sick from birth with a variety of complex medical illnesses in addition to his neuromuscular disease. First, he had military health care, and then we had pretty good private insurance that paid for 16 to 24 hours a day of private duty nursing, durable medical equipment, supplies, prescriptions, hospitals, co-pays. With a tiny bit of help from the local public school systems, he also had occupational therapy, speech therapy, some physical therapy. They even paid for that nurse to attend early intervention preschool for him when he was well enough to attend. So we're back in the hospital, Cody, it's 2004, and he's been classified as minute to minute. In the intensive care, they classify their patients as day to day, hour to hour, or minute to minute, so he was very sick. I couldn't believe it. Here I am with my 8-year-old in the intensive care fighting for his life while my 7-year-old is 600 miles away, fresh off of a severe traumatic brain injury. I couldn't believe it, and I didn't think things could get any worse. And then I got the call. Cody had hit his lifetime maximum, and we were out of insurance. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't function. I already couldn't function. But I did get myself together enough to keep my priorities, because it's not surprising. It's not very hard to keep your priorities straight when your kid is that sick. Eventually, I did get an appointment with the Ohio Medicaid representative. You can't imagine the depths of my despair, but it was equivalent to the depth of my gratitude and my relief when she told me that because Cody had been inpatient for over 30 days, that he could be classified as an Ohio resident, and Medicaid would pick him up. This allowed me to focus on my son completely, and he did eventually turn that corner and survived despite the predictions of his physicians. Several weeks later, we then faced the nightmare of the logistics as we began to discuss the discharge for him. He was now new in a power chair. He had an accessible van, an accessible home. He had even more medical diagnoses. He had even more complex medical needs. And we had to balance that with the needs of his brother, who was still in the early months and weeks after a very severe brain injury. How we were going to pay for it all, how we were going to manage it all. The only way we could see our way through that was to relocate the family to Ohio. By doing this, we were able to secure a new primary insurance, and Medicaid would pick up the nursing that the new primary was not going to pay. Both boys could get all their care at a great facility like Cincinnati Children's across all the needs that they had. So that's what we did. Now, some people think that bad things happen in threes. So we had the traumatic brain injury, we had this very serious illness, and then we lost our insurance. So that's 3. We're good, right? We should be done. Nope. What happened next? Most of you in this room will not be surprised. You've seen it time and time again. It happens so often it's almost a bad cliche. After moving the household and all the kids to Ohio, and their dad finding a job up there, my husband of 25 years informed me that this was all too much, and he was not going to be joining us. I will not pretend I am or was a superwoman. I am not, and I was not. I relied on friends. I called in favors. I leaned on anyone who would help. A big part of that support was Ohio Medicaid that paid for the direct costs that our primary insurance did not pay for Cody. I was a single mom now. There wasn't money for any of that. The provision of shift nursing by Ohio Medicaid at that time was an essential and life-saving support for our entire family. Not only could I not see the light at the end of the tunnel, I couldn't even find the tunnel. Life has a way of evening out, and we did eventually find a new rhythm. Though Cody's medical condition did not improve, his brother's therapies did decrease to once or twice a week, and we, most importantly, began to learn to manage life with someone with a traumatic brain injury. I met a wonderful man who fell in love with all of us and happily joined our merry band of misfits. Luckily, about 10 years after that weekend that we chaotically packed up our entire house and left Virginia over a weekend, my new husband's job brought us back to Virginia, where the Virginia ED/CD waiver almost immediately picked up both boys. Sorry, I'll get it together. Medicaid has continued to provide supports for us. In 2015, Cody was preparing to go into hospice, and we were making end-of-life decisions for him. We found one facility who was willing, to evaluate him for a small bowel transplant. Now, evaluation for small bowel transplant is three-tiered. There's, of course, the medical evaluation. Then there's a social evaluation, where you have to show that you have the physical and social supports for that patient, not only for the first months, for the entire first year, because that procedure is so brutal. The financial piece, you have to show not only that you can cover the $1 million that procedure covers, it's the most expensive organ transplant there is, but you have to cover the transportation, you have to show that you can cover the transportation and the accommodation costs, because small bowel transplant patients have to stay near the facility where they had their operation for several months, and then they have to return frequently that first year. Now, he had good insurance even then. He had government health insurance, and they signed off on that $1 million. But for whatever reason, for this organ only, they would not pay for transportation or the accommodations. Cody did not have time for fundraisers, or concerts, spaghetti dinners, GoFundMe. Cody didn't have time. He was out of time. So Medicaid stepped in again, and Medicaid saved his life again. Cody was only on that list for 3 days when he got his call. And Cody's life and our family's life was forever changed by that miracle. So the question was, what does Medicaid mean to me? To me and my family, Medicaid means life. It's life-saving, and it's life-giving. For my family and for thousands of families across this country, it is an essential and irreplaceable part of our lives. So thank you to all of you for everything you do every day for us. That's what Medicaid means to me.
Stephanie, I want to say 2 things. First, I can't imagine a more thrilling phone call than to hear about the transplant. That's amazing. And also, I want to say to everyone on the panel, please don't apologize for crying. You know, this is a very emotional set of experiences that you're sharing, and we're right there linking arms with you. We are treasure hearing your stories, and the experiences are extremely tough, and we don't expect you to report them like you're giving a policy speech. That's absolutely not what we have in mind. So thank you very, very much. We're so grateful to hear about your experience. And I think there's so many common themes that you and Anna touched on. You know, the suddenness with which circumstances can change, and really could be any of us. Not one single person is immune from those types of changes in life circumstances. And then the interrelationship with private insurance, which has a lot of limitations. You know, we run up against these arbitrary caps in coverage and things that are just not covered, and how Medicaid can wrap around and cover those things. And then just the change in security that it gives to feel like you don't have to constantly be worried about that, and you can actually focus, as you and Anna said so powerfully, on being family caregivers. So thank you so much. I'd now like to introduce Jack Brandt. Jack is a disability policy specialist for the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. He's held that position since 2010. As a Virginia Medicaid recipient, currently enrolled in Medicaid Works, this is the buy-in program, Mr. Brandt is able to both work and retain services and supports. He's received many awards for his leadership in disability advocacy. And an interesting fact is, I learned that he's going to be presenting an award to our panelist, Mike Oxford, later this afternoon. So really funny how that worked out in the scheme of things. But Jack, we'd love to hear your perspective also.
Thank you, Kate. I have a very thick Shenandoah Valley accent, so I brought Sheila along to translate. I have a bachelor's degree from James Madison University and a master's degree from Virginia Commonwealth University.
I can indicate in the introduction I get the partnership for people within the
As Kate indicated in her introduction, I work for the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. And I utilize Medicaid for care services and long-term supports. The reason why I'm telling you this The reason that I'm telling you this is because without the supports that are provided by Medicaid, I would be unable to work in a full-time job. I am not the typical Medicaid recipient. Because I earn above the financial threshold for eligibility.
I grew up with that support band that provided that.
I grew up with a very supportive family that grew up with that provided the necessary supports for me to succeed. After high school, I had a choice of enrolling in Medicaid and living independently or staying at home and not receive Medicaid. I chose to move away from home to enroll in Medicaid and to attend college. After graduating from James Madison University, I found employment.
But I
But I earn too much to remain eligible for Medicaid. However, in the prior year, Virginia chose to allow people to buy into the Medicaid program. And this allowed me to keep personal assistance services. So that I could get out of bed, bathe, eat, and get ready for work. Employer-based insurance does not pay for these services, and if I had to pay for this out of my pocket, I couldn't afford any other living expenses. Medicaid often gets a bad reputation. But I'm here today to tell you that it works. I have difficulty keeping personal assistance.
But it's not what did work.
But it's not an issue with the program.
But it is that
But instead, it's a workforce development issue.
Employment more.
Since IDEA and ADA, we can educate and protect employment rights for people with disabilities.
But without the simple what protect
But without supporting the community, these civil right protections are moot points.
the next import need to be spent and you about more
The Medicaid buy-in program needs to be expanded and utilized by more people with disabilities in order for them to work. I appreciate the opportunity that Medicaid has given me so that I can work a full-time job.
Jack, I think there's some really important parts of your statement, the piece around there being different pathways to connect with Medicaid, and the buy-in program probably is a little less known by some people, and you pointed to the fact that we really need to continue to promote that for people with disabilities. You talked about gaps in other insurance, still not paying for the types of self-direction that personal care assistants provide. And what I really loved about what you said is it makes it possible for civil rights to be a reality in your daily life. It's not just a concept, it's not just a protection, but it makes it a reality. Does that sound right to you?
Exactly.
Okay, really good. Thank you so much. I'm next going to introduce Mike Oxford. Mike has traveled the farthest to get here today. He is the executive director of Topeka Independent Living Resource Center, a center for independent living in Topeka, Kansas. And he has been an advocate and activist for community integration and deinstitutionalization as a right. So some of the civil rights to which Jack referred for over 30 years. Mike uses informal support from his wife and kids and has close family members and friends that rely on Medicaid long-term services and supports. So we'd love to hear your perspective, Mike.
Thank you. Well, after the video and everybody else sort of like, what am I going to say that's different? I'll try. So I first kind of want to put a little bit different frame, because really all of my involvement, well, not all of it, but most of it is on long-term services and supports, home and community-based services. So I'm going to tend to stick in that frame, even though I have to say that I have a cousin who's really like a little brother. We were very close. His mom and my wife were like best friends and all this stuff. And when he was born with multiple disabling conditions, had a bunch of surgeries, open heart surgery, eye surgery. He's had orthopedic surgery and so on. And he's something else. But like Jack, he's involved in a buy-in program. It's called Work in Our State. And he works full-time. He bought his own house. He's getting married. He's got a van. I mean, it really is the American dream. And that's really what I've thought independent living and disability rights ought to be all about and shooting for since I began in this arena in the early 1980s. Since before we had our first Medicaid waiver, it was a totally state and locally funded project helping people move out of Winfield State Hospital in my state. It's been closed now. But it was like a really old 1800 and something sort of, it would make a great Halloween scary house. But anyway, working with people moving out of there and helping people move out and live in their own apartments with home and community supports, since before we had Medicaid home and community supports at home. So that has been my frame, and it really was an aha moment like, wow, this is really wrong to not include people and to segregate people and to make all these assumptions, and so that's been pretty much my life's work. I want to kind of step back and maybe take a bigger view of Medicaid and where I see things are right now, where things are going. So Medicaid really is, I mean, for us in the independent living and disability rights movement world, it's kind of what Jack said. It really is liberty and pursuit of happiness. People with significant disabilities that need long-term services and supports really can't realize equality without these underpinning services and supports. So unlike classic civil rights, take down the signs, no more back of the bus, no more things like that where it was almost all mindset, the fact is there need to be concrete things provided, important things that can't be skimped and that are going to cost some money. And for a lot of people are not going to be affordable, even if you have a good job and you are working full-time and making money, just because if your needs are great enough, you guys Medicaid directors know your outlying cost curves, some of those expenses can be quite high. So rather than just focus on the money, like it talked about, I think, in the video, it's more like on the outcomes. And I know at home, we're trying to look more and more at outcomes, and I know many of you are as well. So it's not like McDonald's, billions served of the worst burger in the world, right? No, it's more like what are we really doing and what are we getting for our money and what's the best thing that we can do. So that's what I've been trying to work on all this time. Since 1990, where I really began keeping track of data and doing more policy stuff, nationally, over 90% of all long-term care dollars were spent on institutions, and only like 8% were spent on any kind of home and community. And most of these home and community programs back then were pretty skinny. You know, a lot of them have, you know, didn't provide a lot of supports, maybe had pretty stringent cost, you know, lines and so on since then. But I think it was last year for the first time the data was out that now that has tipped the other way, and now nationally there's like 52% spent on home and community, and the minority on institutions. There's a lot of variation in our states, and y'all know that. But that's an area that we have to keep pushing on in terms of quality of life, in terms of rights, and frankly in terms of cost effectiveness. Because here's one I'll throw at you. In many states like mine, the old big state hospitals, state schools, state institutions, they're called different things, have been downsized, have been closed down, and so on. But other types of institutions that are entitled under Medicaid have not been addressed. And we all together are going to have to address this, or we're going to keep spending more and more and more and more and more on institutions, and more and more and more and more on home and community, and there's no end in sight. And what really worries us is that the home and community services we're talking about, Jack's talking about, they're all only an option. Y'all know this. You don't have to do it at all. I mean, Olmstead aside, ADA aside, under Medicaid statute, no state has to provide any home and community services. So when big things happen, like maybe giant amounts of federal funding get threatened or something, it really, really, really causes a lot of anxiety and response from the disability community broadly, and that includes our families, parents, and so on. So we've got to work on all sides of these cost curves and not just look over on the optional stuff. So where does this lead me? Unlike everybody else, and Medicaid is great and doing great things. Hundreds of thousands of people in my professional career have moved from segregated, isolated settings into more integrated community settings with friends and family and so on, and that is an awesome thing, and many of you have been part of that. But the fact is, Medicaid ain't perfect. I know that's a surprise. It's not perfect. And the disability rights community doesn't think it's perfect either. So a lot of the Sturm und Drang that you've been seeing this year is not because over people with disabilities pushing back on any changes to Medicaid. It's not because we think it's perfect. It's because it's all there is. It's all there is for many, 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 many people. And great care needs to be taken with understanding funding and optional programs and so on, and how people are going to react to all those things. So Medicaid isn't perfect. There is an institutional bias in Medicaid. Broadly, there's an institutional bias in long-term care. I'll give you another personal example. My mom and dad, I'm an aging baby boomer. My mom and dad are aging. They live in rural Arkansas. My mom was diagnosed many years ago with Alzheimer's. She stayed home with my dad for over 17 years. And my mom and dad are smart, you know, resources, and they had private long-term care insurance, which they could get a policy like I'll describe back then. I don't think they offer them anymore. That's just a whole other area of the institutional bias in long-term care, includes private, I have to say this. And here's what happened. When it got to be too much for my aging father to provide all my mom's supports, his private insurance brought in home health. And it was actually a big benefit. I was like really surprised. I was like, you're getting all of that? That was great. The problem is that it provided the in-home benefit for 2 years and 1 day and the facility for the rest of her life. Private has to be fixed so we can also reform Medicaid, so we can also reform the institutional bias and start putting these things together more seamlessly. But many, many people rely on Medicaid. It's all there is because you either don't have private long-term care insurance, you can't afford it, or it doesn't provide the independent living benefit that we all want. And let's be real here. People my age and all of y'all out here, we want independent living. We want to age in place. This is a fact. This is where we are, and this is where we're going. But without reforming institutional bias, we're not going to get there. Medicaid does need to be reformed. And I just want to say that I know many of you work with your disability community, with your aging community. But I just have to say that when I say disability and aging community, I mean us and not necessarily the provider communities. I'm a provider too. My center has been a provider for many decades in our state. So I don't mean that in a bad way, but I'm saying there is a difference when we represent and speak for ourselves and when a provider who may have a financial interest starts speaking for us. So with the grassroots, people with disabilities, to work on policy, to not just be on an advisory board or something like that, but to dig into rules and regs and policy and how programs work. Because people that use these services, we didn't get into that, they have great ideas and they know how stuff works. And frankly, the disability community is just as conservative and fiscally prudent and dealing with family budgets, you saw it on the video, as any other group. We just don't want more and more and more public spending, you know, no end in sight. We're part of our states, we're part of our federal community, and we want things to be cost effective and to have resources for future generations. But we're going to have to really work together, and please make use of us is the main thing I want to say. I mean, I've known Matt Salo for many years, decades now, and there you go. He made use of me. That's why I'm here. Thank you.
So that was a definitely powerful call to action, and you're not going to get any disagreement in the room that Medicaid needs improvement. We all want to, engage on that. I am very struck, particularly in your remarks, by the pieces around, actual engagement of members. That's constantly something we have to call ourselves to more attention around, so we hear you on that. I'm also struck by how recent in time we've had any of these developments in long-term services and supports. I remember 1984 in Connecticut was the first year we had one of the waivers, and it's really recent in time, and it's a precious resource, and as you said, we've got to make sure that we give enough resources and invest and create meaningful choice as opposed to limited options compared to what we otherwise cover. So I really appreciate everything you said on that, and we all do. Finally, I would like to introduce Mila Johns. Mila lives in Chevy Chase, Maryland. She's a former terrorism analyst and also a local politician. She's a wife and she's a mother who is living with a genetic connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Mila's connection to Medicaid is that she was able to enroll in the program when she was pregnant, and it saved her daughter's life. Mila, would you share your story?
Hi, I'm going to be a little more micro than Mike's very macro take on it. My story is that when I was 20, I was kicked off my health insurance because of a pre-existing condition. This was pre-ACA, and a few months later, I found out that I was pregnant. I never envisioned that I would be enrolling in Medicaid. I had a solidly middle-class upbringing. I had my parents' insurance. I was at college. I didn't know what to do, and luckily the state Medicaid program was there for me. I was able to enroll because I was a single, unmarried student, and I enrolled in the nick of time. Within a few weeks of enrolling in the Medicaid program for my pregnancy, and I was 5.5 months pregnant when I found this out, so we had all of the prenatal stuff to catch up on. I went into preterm labor at 6 months. I had grown very used in the months of not having health insurance, of you don't go to the doctor, you don't do anything because the catastrophic medical bills could derail everything. So even with the Medicaid coverage, that mentality was still there. And I hesitated. And thank God I didn't hesitate too long. I was able to get to the ER in time. They were able to stop the preterm labor. I had a lot of restrictions and bed rest, and I made it to almost 37 weeks and delivered a healthy baby girl. And at this time, we didn't know I had my connective tissue disorder. The pregnancy complications kind of put 2 and 2 together after a while. But Medicaid also covered when I was readmitted to the hospital 2 days later because I had a massive spinal fluid leak and couldn't sit up for 3 weeks. It enabled me to be able to finish my undergrad career. I became the first person in my family to graduate college. I was able to go on and get a master's degree and take care of my daughter. And now I am giving back in the way that I can. I've been a public servant, and I'm trying to do that again. And it made all the difference. And I can't even imagine what my life would be like if I had not been able to take advantage of that program.
So, Mila, you just talked about another pathway to Medicaid coverage, which is pregnancy coverage. How did you learn about the coverage at the time?
Actually, my mother worked in insurance, so I was very lucky that she already knew all this, and she just bulldozed through everything, and it was a matter of days. It was frankly impressive. I have no idea how she managed it, but yeah, and it was amazing.
That's a remarkable story. Well, it's another reminder, like so many of the comments before, there's different entry points to Medicaid. Sometimes it can be for someone supporting them over their lifespan, person with a disability who may want to be self-directing services. But sometimes it's a limited window in time where you may need it for some particular purpose, like the pregnancy coverage. And can you talk about, did you have knowledge of Medicaid before this happened?
No, I didn't know the difference between Medicaid and Medicare when this happened.
Not alone.
I was 19 and 20. I had never thought about it. So this was a complete eye-opening experience to me of how valuable these programs are and how desperately people need them.
So I think one of the other questions that we all talked about as a panel is what would people on this panel like the room to know about folks who are served by Medicaid? And I think so many themes have already emerged, that they're working people is a very, very important theme, that they're caregivers, that they want to do right by children, they want to do right by other family members, they want to live their own destiny. Mike's comments about self-direction and choice in the community. Would anyone else like to add anything to that? Anything you'd like the room to know about people served by Medicaid that hasn't emerged, or something you want to reinforce?
Well, just one thing real quick that I meant to mention in my hieroglyphs here. Workforce. It's not so much on, the people being served, but there is a workforce crisis in the country. And that's within like agency-based services, home health, what have you, and in the self-directed services. And so, that's just another element that we're going to have to grapple with. And it includes things like a piece of the institutional bias, like oftentimes wages are higher for the same type of work in an institution than in someone's home. And near and dear to my own heart, being from Kansas, is that in rural and frontier areas, it's a different set of issues than in urban areas, but it's really, really, really difficult. And basically, I think in the rural and frontier areas is if you don't have a family member or a close friend that you can hire to do your long-term services for you, there isn't an agency. There isn't a backup kind of place. And so I just have to say, as I've started looking at this, and as a provider since 1992, where you see 90% of the money would come in the door. 90% of the money would come in one door and out the other. It's wages and fringe. So you boil it down, and one other way of looking at Medicaid from maybe the other end of the periscope is Medicaid home and community services are the workforce, is the workforce. It's people coming in to people's homes, putting their hands on people and helping them do the things that we've talked about. Get up, get dressed, take your meds, eat, do whatever you need to do. That is really where all the money on the LTSS side anyway is being spent, is paying a worker to put their hands on someone with a disability and assist them. And we got to remember that too. I've been arguing for many decades, right, the cost effectiveness. Home and community is a lot cheaper than the institution. It is. It's a good argument. Things have really expanded. But you know what? I got to be honest now, looking at it, is maybe that's gotten pushed a little too hard, because that cost effectiveness issue has to do with we're not giving benefits and training and wages and support to the workforce. And so just one thing I read, it came from the aging community, it was new to me, is that you know, we talk a lot about assessing people with disabilities and so on to see what the needs are and using those tools. And those tools are getting better. But gee, I mean, this thing I read was like, you know what, we should assess caregivers too. And we should see what caregiver needs are and what their training and what their support is too. I'm like, what a great idea. I wish it was mine, but it was somebody else's and I read about it. So I just kind of stop with that, is that the workforce has to be attended to, or we're not going to have any home and community-based services.
Thank you. Very powerful.
What I would like to see more for Medicaid, like Matt said, it's not perfect because being my mother's caretaker, that's new to me, and there is no manual, and I mean there is none. I remember talking to her first neurologist at GW, and I told him I was at wit's end because I did not know what I was doing as far as my mother's care. Somebody said, well, you being a good son, and I'm asking, how can you quantify something like that? Because there's no manual for what I have to go through. I mean, because there is no classes on how to actually, when I started doing this, I'm in my 8th year of being my mother's caretaker. There's no one to tell, there's no one around to tell me to do how to do that. I was telling Kate there, somebody had asked me, is her situation terminal? Terminal is a relative term. What's terminal about my mother's condition is my mother could be sitting for me 5 feet and ask me, who am I? Who are you? My mother can look at me and ask me, why is Uncle Charlie and Aunt Margaret downstairs in the basement? And both my aunt and my uncle have been dead over 40 years. The hardest thing for me to do with my mother as a caretaker is to give her a bath. That is the hardest thing for me to do. That's my mother. I would not have any trouble giving any one of you here a bath, but no, excuse me, please do not laugh, because that is nothing to laugh about. I have no problem giving not one of you a shower or a bath. But I am a man talking about doing this for a mother. My mother. So please, I'm not getting mad at you. I do not want you to not laugh. I don't understand. I don't want you to think that that is something easy for me sitting up here saying that. No, that is not. My younger brother looks at me and say, and he'll go, and I know what he's saying because he knows he can't do that. It takes a certain mindset to do that one ordeal. So when we talk about what I would like to see, to talk about caregivers and what are my needs. One, whoever, see, I know it's with Anna and Stephanie, also here, I do not know what they go through as a caregiver. Please do not come out the mouth and say, I know what you're going through, because you'll be lying. You do not know what I have to go through. I do not know what they have to go through. All I know, they're a caregiver. Okay? And like I said, the hardest thing that I have to go through is just giving her, I can feed her. I can go for a walk. I can wash her clothes. Taking her to a doctor's appointment, that's not a problem. Giving her a shower, that takes a lot out of me to get me to do that. Hearing somebody who says, I understand what you're going through, no, you do not. I do not know what some of the panelists are going through. I'm not in their household. I don't know what the challenges they go through. But all of you here that are directors of Medicaid, I would like to see you address caregivers. Do something for them. Because, see, like I said, I came up here with my walker. Stephanie can tell you, when I started shower and doing everything else, I was in my wheelchair. And didn't have to take care of my mother. I'm in my 8th year. Some of you out there, I know for a fact, is somebody's caregiver. Some of you out there, you know somebody else other than us is somebody's caregiver. And yet, you couldn't give me a manual to put in my face that was, but I need help. I tell everybody, I talk about when I do something for a AmeriHealth Care Talk, that's like my therapy because it gives me a couple hours away from my mother. Doesn't say I don't love my mother, but remember, I'm there with her 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So that's something I would love to see Medicaid come up with. How to assist caregivers. I mean, yes, you are there to pay my hospital bills. That is wonderful. You're there to support me in improving my health. Excellent. But now I have another need, and I think a few of the panels up here probably have the same need that I might have. I'm not sure, but I'm just saying that, and I can be wrong. But we need assistance as being a caregiver. Believe me. I mean, like, because I do. Like I told somebody, what I'm doing with my mother was on a wing and a prayer. And I mean that literally. And like I told Kate, and I told Cordelia, matter of fact, I said Stephanie over there who's sitting, the pleasure and the honor is mine to be sit here to talk to all of you. But I want each and every last one of you that's sitting here that can make a decision. Make the decision that is going to benefit each and every last one of us to improve in areas that we need improvement of. One is being a caregiver. The other is to make sure that we have more personal interaction with you. Trust me. I can, and like I said, I'm maybe because I'm spoiled because with Stephanie Hafsid out there, I pretty much know 95% of the staff plus other members of my hospitalization plan. I know some of the other members from the Philadelphia office at AmeriHealth Care Talks. I'm just getting to meet these people for the first time. Somebody asked me, who was it, said, why does Medicaid take a hit? Well, one, we don't know anybody. I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know anything like this exists. The only thing I can tell you about Medicaid was that it was in Baltimore. That's it. Now ask me who is the person in charge of it. I couldn't tell you who he or she or they are or what they look like.
Can I follow
So,
up?
yes. So that's another thing that I would like to see change. More personal interaction. I know that's a little hard to do, but that is something that's also needed. Because, see, one thing, I'm going to tell y'all something, make this quick. I'm sitting here. I am supposed to be each and every last one of you, your advocate, and be accountable to you. Now, how in the world I'm going to be your advocate and accountable to you when I don't even know you? So for you to get Rufus Watson Jr. to help you, you need to be up in my face. You need to introduce yourself to me. Because yes, I want to be your advocate. I want to help you. But now I ask you one important question. Did you give me that opportunity? Now, how many of you in this room that's sitting right there can say, you give me that opportunity to be your advocate, to be accountable to? Yes, you are accountable to me. Yes, you are my advocate. But now, let's flip that script. How many of you in here sitting right now can say right now, Rufus Watson Jr. is accountable to you? I want to see a hand. Come on, make a lie out of me. Other than Kate,
We are accountable to you, we promise.
How many of you? Come on. Well, let's put it this way. How many of you are willing to make me an advocate for you? Raise your hand.
Let's see some hands, please. Rufus, I love that. That's going to be your last word.
I cannot see hands. So let me ask this again. How many of you be willing to make me be an advocate for you, be accountable to you? Thank you.
That's wonderful. We're going to give Mila the last word.
I wanted to kind of follow up on what Rufus is saying is I think part of the reason so many people have misconceptions about Medicaid is we don't know. We think we don't know people who are on Medicaid. We don't know what it does. We don't know. It's a bureaucratic black hole for many people who aren't served by it until they need it, and they may not even know it's an option for them. And I think part of the reason it's an easy political target sometimes is because people don't know. And we need to do a better job of having events like this where people who have had their lives changed or are living or have had their lives saved because of it get to tell our stories so that the real value of this program is known and it creates more of the public support that allows you guys to do what you do.
This is not easy. It's not like, yay, my family was in debt and I couldn't feed my kids. You know, it's not something that like we love to talk about or share. But that's why we do it. We all have come up here and shared our stories today because it means that much to us and it's so valuable to us that we're willing to put pride and everything aside so that we can share that with you and hope that you understand where we are coming from when it comes to Medicaid and everything that goes along with it.
Well, on behalf of all my fellow Medicaid directors and the entire room, we honor your experience. We don't take it lightly or for granted that you shared your stories with us today. And I just want to ask the room, please may we acknowledge again our panelists.